The discovery. Officer Daniel Carter had seen his fair share of strange calls during his 10 years on the force, but nothing quite like this. It was a crisp autumn evening in Brookhaven, the kind where the setting sun bathed the quiet streets in amber and gold. Daniel sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, the familiar hum of the engine keeping him company as he made his rounds. Most days were uneventful in this small town, an occasional shoplifting incident, a fender bender, or a call about a lost dog. He had just turned onto Oakwood Drive when his radio crackled. Unit 24, we have a report of a suspicious item found in Oakwood Park. Group of kids reported it near the playground. Please respond. Daniel sighed, pressing the button on his radio. Copy that, dispatch. On my way. Oakwood Park was a quiet place at this hour. The playground was mostly empty except for a few lingering kids, their backpacks still slung over their shoulders. They stood clustered near the swing set, their faces filled with uncertainty and curiosity. As soon as Daniel stepped out of his cruiser, a young boy, no older than 10, waved him over. Officer Carter. Over here, the boy called. Daniel approached cautiously. What's going on? A girl with pigtails pointed towards a small wicker basket nestled near the base of the slide. We found it when we were playing hide and seek, she said. We thought it was just, like, someone's picnic or something. But then. She hesitated, exchanging nervous glances with the others. Daniel's heartbeat quickened as he stepped closer. Inside the basket, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, lay a baby. The child was impossibly small, no more than a few months old. Dark, inquisitive eyes met Daniel's as the baby sucked on his tiny fist, his expression calm, almost as if he had been expecting someone to find him. A wave of shock, then sadness, then anger crashed over Daniel. Who would leave a baby like this? He knelt down carefully, his training kicking in as he assessed the child's condition. No visible injuries. No signs of distress. The baby was breathing fine, and aside from the odd place he had been left, he seemed well cared for. Daniel swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the edge of the basket. Did anyone see who left him here? The kids shook their heads. No, the boy admitted. He was just, here. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. The responsible part of him, the cop, knew exactly what to do next. Call it in. Secure the scene. Wait for social services. But another part of him, the man who had longed for a family of his own, hesitated. The baby blinked up at him, his small chest rising and falling steadily. A note was tucked into the folds of the blanket. Daniel gently pulled it out, his pulse quickening as he unfolded the crumpled paper. His name is Noah. I have no choice. Please take care of him. That was it. No explanation. No signature. Just a desperate plea written in shaky handwriting. Daniel exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He pressed his radio. Dispatch, this is Carter. I've got an abandoned infant at Oakwood Park. Requesting immediate assistance. Copy that, Officer Carter. EMS is on the way. Stay with the child. As he waited, he cradled the baby in his arms, feeling the warmth of the tiny body against his chest. Noah. Who had left him here? And why? But deep down, Daniel already knew one thing for certain. Whoever had abandoned this child, he wasn't about to let him feel alone ever again. The decision. Daniel Carter had always considered himself a rational man. His job demanded it. As a police officer, he had learned to separate emotions from duty, to make clear-headed choices in tense situations. But as he sat in the quiet hospital room later that night, watching the baby in the bassinet beside him, he felt a tug in his chest that he couldn't ignore. Noah. The name written on that crumpled piece of paper echoed in his mind like a whisper of fate. After finding the baby in Oakwood Park, protocol had dictated that he turn him over to Child Protective Services. The paramedics had arrived within minutes, confirming that Noah was in good health. But that didn't make it any easier to let go when the caseworker gently lifted the child from Daniel's arms. "You did the right thing, Officer Carter," she had said. Had he? Daniel had gone home that night, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Noah's small face looking up at him. The soft weight of the baby in his arms still lingered, like a phantom sensation that refused to fade. 3 days passed. Then 4. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. Daniel drove straight to the Brookhaven Family Services office, his heart pounding like he was walking into a crime scene. A middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose looked up as he entered. "Officer Carter. I was expecting you." He hesitated. "You were?" The woman, caseworker Linda Matthews, smiled knowingly. "Most officers don't follow up on cases like this. But you're different." Daniel swallowed. "How is he?" Linda gestured toward a chair, and he sat, feeling more nervous than he had in any interrogation room. "He's doing well," she said. "We placed him in a temporary foster home while we investigate. Unfortunately, we haven't found any leads on his parents. No missing child reports. No security footage showing who left him at the park. It's like he appeared out of thin air." Daniel clenched his fists. Someone had to have made the decision to leave Noah there. And that someone had walked away without looking back. "Is there a plan for adoption?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Linda studied him for a long moment, as if measuring the weight of his words. "Are you asking out of curiosity," she said, "or because you want to be involved?" The air in the room felt heavy. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face. This wasn't how he had imagined his life unfolding. He was 34, married only to his job, and had never seriously considered becoming a father. Not like this. But hadn't something changed the moment he picked Noah up from that basket? Hadn't something shifted inside him? "I want to adopt him," Daniel said, the word surprising even himself. Linda nodded, not looking shocked in the slightest. "It won't be easy. You're single. The system prefers two-parent households. And as a police officer, your job is high risk. They'll scrutinize every aspect of your life." "I don't care," Daniel said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." She leaned forward, folding her hands. "Then let's start the process." Months of challenges. The adoption process was brutal. Daniel had expected background checks, financial reviews, and home visits. What he hadn't anticipated was the emotional toll. "Do you understand the complexities of raising a black child in today's world?" one caseworker asked during an interview. Daniel had nodded, but the truth was, he had no idea. So he studied. He read books on black culture and identity. He had long conversations with his black colleagues on the force, asking them what it had been like growing up, what challenges he might face as a white father raising a black son. He also had to prove he could provide a stable home. His small two-bedroom house was suddenly under a microscope. Did it have enough space? Was it childproof? Would his long work hours affect his ability to be a present father? "You're fighting an uphill battle," Linda admitted one evening after another exhausting round of interviews. "But I have to say, I've never seen someone so determined." Daniel exhaled. "Because he's already my son. Even if the paperwork doesn't say so yet." The first night home. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the doorway of his house, holding Noah in his arms. He had won. The final court hearing had been emotional. The judge had read through Daniel's file, acknowledging that while single-parent adoptions were challenging, Daniel had proved himself in every way. With a final stamp of approval, the judge had said, "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You're officially Noah's father." And now, here they were. Noah was a year old by then, his soft curls bouncing as he looked around the house with wide, curious eyes. Daniel set him down on the living room floor, unsure of what to do next. "Well, buddy," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is home now." Noah clapped his hands, babbling happily as he crawled toward the couch. Daniel watched him, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had faced armed criminals, saved lives, and walked into dangerous situations without hesitation. But this, being a father, felt like the scariest thing he had ever done. Still, as Noah giggled and reached for him, Daniel knew one thing. He would never let this boy feel abandoned again. No matter what challenges came next, they would face them together. Because Noah wasn't just a baby he had found in a park. He was his son. A father's love. Years passed, but one thing never changed: Noah was Daniel's son in every way that mattered. From the moment Daniel had brought him home, he had poured his heart into raising him. The single life he once knew was gone, replaced by early morning diaper changes, late-night rocking sessions, and more baby food disasters than he cared to count. But Daniel wouldn't trade it for anything. By the time Noah turned 5, he had grown into a bright, curious child with an infectious laugh and an endless supply of energy. "Dad! Look!" Noah called one afternoon as he raced across their backyard, his small feet kicking up the autumn leaves. He was holding a toy police car, a miniature replica of the one Daniel drove for work. Daniel smiled as he watched his son zoom the car across the porch railing. "Is that your new patrol vehicle, Officer Noah?" Noah grinned, puffing out his chest. "Yeah. I'm gonna catch all the bad guys." Daniel chuckled. "Just make sure you do your paperwork too. That's the real challenge." Noah scrunched his face in disgust. "No way. I just want to chase the bad guys." Daniel shook his head, ruffling his son's curls. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." But as much as Daniel cherished the joy of fatherhood, there were moments that reminded him their journey wasn't always going to be easy. The first questions. One evening, as Daniel tucked Noah into bed, his son turned to him with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy? Why don't I look like you?" The question was inevitable. But Daniel still felt a pang in his chest when he heard it. He took a deep breath, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Well, that's because we're not the same color. But families aren't just about looking the same. They're about loving each other." Noah frowned. "So you picked me?" Daniel's throat tightened. "I found you, Noah. And from the moment I saw you, I knew I wanted to be your dad." "Forever?" "Forever," Daniel promised, brushing his fingers through Noah's soft curls. "No matter what." Noah beamed, satisfied with the answer. Within minutes, he was snoring softly, clutching his stuffed bear. But Daniel lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, knowing that as Noah got older, the questions would get harder. Challenges in the real world. Daniel always knew he'd have to prepare Noah for the world, but nothing could have prepared him for the day Noah first faced discrimination. It happened when he was 8. They had gone to a small diner after Daniel's shift, one of their favorite spots in town. Noah loved the pancakes, and Daniel enjoyed the coffee after long nights on duty. But this time was different. A man at the counter gave them a long, hard stare. At first, Daniel ignored it, used to odd glances from people who didn't expect a white cop and a black child to be together. But then Noah tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Dad, why is that man looking at me like that?" Before Daniel could respond, the man sneered. "Didn't know they let people like you adopt our kind." Silence. Noah didn't understand the insult, but Daniel did. A cold anger settled in his chest, but he refused to let it show. Instead, he leaned down and whispered, "Finish your pancakes, buddy. We're gonna take them to go. Noah obeyed, sensing the shift in his father's tone. As Daniel walked to the counter to pay, he locked eyes with the man. You got something to say? The man scoffed. Just don't see how it makes sense, that's all. Daniel exhaled sharply. Yeah, well, it makes perfect sense to me. That boy is my son. And if you have a problem with that, that's yours to carry, not his. He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed their food and walked out, holding Noah's small hand in his own. The whole drive home, Daniel's grip on the steering wheel was tight. That night, as he tucked Noah into bed, he promised himself one thing. He would make sure his son knew exactly who he was, loved, valued, and capable of anything. Building identity. As Noah grew older, Daniel made it a point to surround him with positive black role models. He introduced him to his black colleagues on the force, took him to cultural events, and made sure he had friends who looked like him. One evening, when Noah was 10, they sat in the living room watching an old documentary about the civil rights movement. Noah turned to Daniel with an intense expression. Did people really treat black people like that? Daniel nodded. Yeah. And sometimes, they still do. Noah's brow furrowed. Does that mean people don't like me because of my skin? Daniel swallowed hard. Some people might judge you before they know you. But that doesn't mean you ever let them decide who you are. You define yourself, Noah. Noah sat quietly for a moment, processing the words. Then he nodded. Okay. Daniel knew it was only the beginning of those conversations. But he was ready. A fateful knock on the door. By the time Noah turned 15, he had grown into a smart, confident young man. He was tall for his age, athletic, and had a natural charm that made people gravitate toward him. Daniel couldn't have been prouder. But just as he thought they had settled into their life, the past came knocking. Literally. One evening, as Daniel prepared dinner, there was a sharp knock at the door. He frowned, wiping his hands on a towel before heading to answer it. When he pulled open the door, he felt the ground shift beneath him. A man stood on the porch. Tall. Lean. Dark skin. His features bore an eerie resemblance to Noah's. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen that face before, on Noah. The man cleared his throat. Are you Daniel Carter? Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. Yeah. Who are you? The man exhaled sharply, his hands shaking at his sides. My name is Marcus Bryant, he said. I think I'm Noah's father. Silence. Daniel's world tilted, his grip tightening on the doorknob. This was the moment he had never wanted to face. Noah's real father had come back. And everything they had built might never be the same. The past comes knocking. A face from the past. Daniel's grip on the doorknob tightened as he stared at the man in front of him. Marcus Bryant. Noah's biological father. For years, Daniel had convinced himself that this moment would never come. He had been there for Noah's first steps, his first words, his first day of school. He had been there for scraped knees, basketball games, and late-night talks about life. He had been there when Noah had nightmares and needed comfort. And now, this man, this stranger, stood before him, claiming to be Noah's father. Daniel took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. How did you find us? Marcus shifted on his feet, his hands trembling. I've been searching for years. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't abandon him, man. I swear. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting Daniel's again. I need to see him. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had no idea what this man wanted, but one thing was clear, he wasn't letting him walk into Noah's life without answers. Come inside, Daniel said cautiously. Marcus stepped in, his eyes scanning the home, the family pictures, the warmth, the life that had been built here. His gaze landed on a framed photograph on the mantel, Noah at age 10, grinning ear to ear, with Daniel standing proudly beside him. Marcus exhaled shakily. He's grown so much. Daniel folded his arms. Why now? Marcus hesitated. It's complicated. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Try me. Marcus let out a deep sigh, rubbing a hand over his face. I didn't know where he was for years. When I finally got my life together, I started looking. And then. His voice cracked. I found out he was here. With you. Daniel felt an icy realization settle over him. You found out recently? Marcus nodded. I only got confirmation a few months ago. Daniel's pulse pounded. So what? You think you can just show up and take him back? Marcus's face twisted with pain. No. That's not what I'm saying. He took a deep breath. I just want to see my son. The words cut through Daniel like a blade. My son. Daniel clenched his jaw. He's my son too. Silence filled the room. The weight of 14 years of love, care, and sacrifice hung between them. Marcus looked down, his voice breaking. I know. Noah walks in. Just then, the front door opened. Dad, I'm home. Noah's voice rang through the house. Both men turned as Noah, now 15, stepped into the living room. He was tall, his athletic build filling out more with age, his face a perfect blend of curiosity and confidence. His backpack hung loosely over his shoulder, and his hoodie was unzipped from the fall breeze outside. But the moment his eyes landed on Marcus, his whole body froze. Who? Noah's voice trailed off. His gaze flicked between Daniel and Marcus, confusion swirling in his dark eyes. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He had dreaded this moment for years, and now it was unfolding in real time, beyond his control. Marcus swallowed hard. Noah. Noah's brows furrowed. Who are you? Marcus's lips parted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm your father. Noah's entire body stiffened. His backpack slipped from his shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud. Daniel stepped forward. Noah, we need to talk. Noah's gaze darted between them, panic flickering in his eyes. Wait, what? Marcus took a hesitant step forward. I know this is a shock, but I... Wait. Noah held up his hands. You're saying you're my real dad? Marcus nodded. Yes. Noah turned to Daniel, his voice shaking. You never told me. Daniel felt a knife twist in his heart. I wanted to, Noah. You lied to me. Noah's voice cracked with emotion. Daniel reached out, but Noah jerked back, his breathing uneven. I need to, he turned toward the door, his hands shaking. I need air. And before either man could stop him, he was gone. A father's regret. Daniel felt his entire world shift. Noah had never walked away from him like that before. Marcus exhaled shakily. I'm sorry. Daniel turned, his emotions simmering beneath his skin. You don't get to say that. Marcus held up his hands. I didn't come here to hurt him. Daniel ran a hand over his face, trying to steady his breathing. You should go. Marcus hesitated. Please. Just, tell him I'll be around. If he wants to talk. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, but he nodded stiffly. Marcus took one last look around the house, one last look at the life his son had built without him, before stepping out into the night. The moment the door closed, Daniel sank onto the couch, his hands gripping his head. For the first time in years, he felt like he was losing his son. Noah's anguish. Noah sat on the old swings at the park, his mind racing. The very place Daniel had found him all those years ago now felt like a storm of confusion. He thought about all the bedtime stories, the soccer games, the inside jokes he shared with Daniel. And yet, he had a real father out there. A man with his same skin, his same blood. Why had Daniel never told him? Why had Marcus left? Tears burned in Noah's eyes as he kicked the ground, sending dead leaves scattering into the wind. For 15 years, his world had been simple. And now, everything had changed. The broken bond. Daniel found Noah an hour later, sitting alone in the darkness. He approached cautiously. Noah. Noah didn't look up. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel sighed, sitting on the swing beside him. I was going to. When the time was right. Noah's voice was thick. And when was that? Daniel hesitated. I don't know. I was scared. Noah scoffed. Scared of what? That I'd want to know my own father? Daniel's chest tightened. Scared that I'd lose you. Noah turned to him then, his face full of turmoil. But you are losing me, Dad. Daniel's breath caught. The words hit harder than any punch he'd ever taken. Noah exhaled shakily. I don't know who I am anymore. Daniel's heart ached. You're my son. Noah's lips trembled. But I'm also his. The pain in his voice was unbearable. Daniel wanted to promise that everything would be okay. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if it would be. Torn between two worlds. A house divided. The days after Marcus's arrival were a storm of tension. Noah barely spoke. His usual jokes and warm smiles were gone, replaced by distant stares and heavy silences. He spent more time alone in his room, headphones in, lost in his own thoughts. Daniel tried to act normal, to make dinner, to ask about school, to keep things together, but the weight of Noah's confusion sat between them like an unspoken wall. And then there was Marcus. He had left town after their first meeting, but he wasn't gone. Every few days, Daniel saw his car parked near the basketball court at the park, or across the street from the school, always at a distance. He wasn't trying to force himself into Noah's life, but he was there. Waiting. Hoping. And Daniel hated it. One night, as Daniel stood by the kitchen sink, washing dishes, he heard footsteps behind him. Dad. Daniel turned, heart racing. It had been days since Noah had willingly spoken to him. Noah hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. Can we talk? Daniel nodded. Of course. They sat down at the dining table, and for a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with everything left unsaid. Noah finally took a deep breath. I met him today. Daniel's grip on his chair tightened. Marcus? Noah nodded. Yeah. At the park. Daniel felt a cold unease settle in his stomach. Did he pressure you? No. Noah shook his head. He just talked. Told me about his past. How he lost his way. How he went to prison. Daniel tensed. Prison. He had guessed Marcus had a troubled past, but hearing it confirmed made his protective instincts flare. I asked him why he left me, Noah continued. His voice wavered. He said he didn't want to. That he got arrested before he could come back. Daniel's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Noah met his gaze, eyes shining with emotion. Do you know what else he told me? Daniel swallowed hard. What? That he tried to find me for years, but I was already adopted. Daniel's heart pounded. Noah's voice broke. You knew, didn't you? Daniel exhaled shakily. Yes. Noah's jaw tightened. And you never told me? I was trying to protect you, Noah. From what? His voice cracked with frustration. From knowing I had a father out there who wanted me? Daniel leaned forward, his voice raw. From getting hurt. From opening old wounds that should have stayed closed. Noah shook his head, standing up. It wasn't your decision to make. Daniel stood too. I raised you. I am your father. Noah's breath hitched, his fists trembling at his sides. Then why does it feel like a part of me was missing this whole time? Daniel felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He had spent 15 years giving Noah everything he had, his love, his guidance, his entire heart. And now, for the first time, it wasn't enough. Noah turned toward the door. I need time to figure this out. And then he was gone. Marcus's redemption. Noah found Marcus sitting on the bleachers at the basketball court. The older man looked up, a hopeful light in his eyes. Hey, kid. Noah sat down beside him. I don't know what to do. Marcus nodded, his gaze distant. I get it. Noah exhaled. I feel like I'm betraying him by even talking to you. Marcus studied his hands. You're not betraying him, Noah. You're just trying to find yourself. Silence stretched between them before Noah spoke again. Tell me about my mom. Marcus let out a long breath. She was everything to me. His voice softened. Strong. Kind. She could light up a room just by smiling. Noah swallowed hard. Did she love me? More than anything. A lump formed in Noah's throat. Then why did she leave me? Marcus's face darkened with grief. She didn't have a choice. She got sick, and we had no money for treatment. When she realized she wouldn't make it, she made me promise to find a safe place for you. Noah felt his heart clench. He had spent his whole life wondering about his mother, and now he knew, she hadn't abandoned him. She had been protecting him. Marcus's voice broke. I should have fought harder to keep you. Noah studied the man beside him. He had expected to hate him. But now, all he felt was sadness. Marcus turned to him. I don't expect you to love me. I don't expect you to call me Dad. I just... He looked away. I just want to know you. Noah's chest ached. I don't know if I'm ready. Marcus nodded. That's okay. Take your time. And for the first time since this all began, Noah felt a little less lost. A father's fear. Daniel sat in Noah's room, staring at the basketball trophies on his shelf, the childhood drawings pinned to the wall, the memories of a life they had built together. He had spent so many years being Noah's father. He didn't know how to be anything else. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Noah stepped in, hands in his pockets. His face was unreadable. Daniel's heart pounded. Noah. Noah sat on the bed across from him. I'm not going anywhere. Daniel felt his breath hitch. What? I know you think I might leave. Noah's voice was quiet but firm. But you're my dad. That's not going to change. Relief crashed over Daniel like a tidal wave. Noah rubbed his hands together. But I am going to get to know Marcus. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but he nodded. I understand. Noah met his eyes. I need you to be okay with that. Daniel swallowed hard. I don't know if I ever will be. Noah studied him. Then try. For me. Daniel exhaled slowly. I'll try. And for the first time in weeks, the weight on both their shoulders felt a little lighter. The road ahead. Things didn't magically fix themselves overnight. There were still awkward moments, tense conversations, and emotions that neither Daniel nor Noah fully knew how to process. Marcus was still an outsider, trying to find his place. Daniel was still a father, trying to hold on to the son he had raised. And Noah was still a boy caught between two worlds, trying to figure out who he was. But they were trying. And sometimes, that was enough. A family redefined. An unlikely meeting. The weeks that followed were a slow, delicate dance. Noah divided his time between Marcus and Daniel, carefully trying to balance his two worlds. Some days, he would shoot hoops with Marcus at the park, learning more about his past, his struggles, his regrets. Other days, he would have dinner with Daniel, watching old movies like they used to, trying to reassure him that their bond hadn't changed. But despite Noah's efforts, the tension between Marcus and Daniel remained thick, unspoken but ever-present. It all came to a breaking point one Saturday afternoon. Daniel was in the driveway, fixing a broken part of Noah's bike, when he heard a car pull up behind him. He turned, and there was Marcus, standing beside his old sedan, hands in his pockets, hesitation written all over his face. Daniel's jaw clenched. "What are you doing here?" Marcus exhaled. "We need to talk." Daniel crossed his arms. "We have nothing to talk about." Marcus nodded slowly, as if expecting the hostility. "Look, I get it. You don't trust me. I don't blame you." Daniel scoffed. "You left him." Marcus flinched but didn't argue. "I did. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Silence stretched between them before Marcus continued, his voice quieter. "But you need to understand something, I never stopped loving him. I may not have been there, but I thought about him every single day. I searched for him. And now that I've found him, I'm not going anywhere." Daniel's hands tightened into fists. "And what? You expect me to just step aside? Let you walk in and take my place?" Marcus met his gaze. "I don't want to take your place. I just want a place." Daniel's breath caught. Marcus took a step forward. "I know I can't change the past. And I know you're the reason Noah grew up safe, loved, and happy. But I also know what it feels like to be a kid who doesn't know where he comes from." Daniel swallowed hard, feeling a pang of something he didn't want to name. "I don't want to take him away from you," Marcus continued. "I just want to know my son. And if there's any part of you that actually cares about what's best for him, then you'll let that happen." Daniel exhaled sharply. "And if I don't?" Marcus held his gaze. "Then you're only hurting Noah." A thick silence fell between them. Daniel wanted to argue, to push Marcus away, to hold on to the only son he had ever known. But deep down, he knew Marcus was right. Noah wasn't a possession to be claimed. He was a boy with questions, with missing pieces, with a heart big enough to love them both. And Daniel had to let him. The hardest decision. That night, Daniel sat at the dinner table, staring at the empty seat across from him. Noah was out with Marcus. The house felt too quiet. Too empty. For 15 years, it had just been the two of them. They had weathered every storm, fought every battle together. And now, for the first time, Daniel felt like he was losing him. But he wasn't, was he? Noah had told him he wasn't going anywhere. But that didn't make it easier. With a heavy sigh, Daniel reached for his phone and hesitated, then, with a deep breath, he sent a text. "Me, where are you?" A minute later, Noah replied. "Noah, at the park. With Marcus. You okay?" Daniel stared at the message. He wasn't sure how to answer that. Finally, he typed, "Mind if I join?" Noah's response came almost immediately. "Noah, of course." Daniel stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out into the night. A new beginning. When Daniel arrived at the park, he found Noah and Marcus sitting on a bench, talking quietly. The basketball sat at Noah's feet, forgotten. Noah looked up as Daniel approached. "Hey." Daniel nodded, his eyes flicking to Marcus. Marcus tensed slightly, as if bracing for a fight. But Daniel just sighed and sat down beside Noah. "So, what are we talking about?" Noah blinked in surprise. Just stuff. Family. Life." Daniel nodded. "Sounds important." Noah studied him carefully. "Are you okay with this?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at Marcus, then back at Noah. "I don't know if I'll ever be okay with it. But I know that you need this. And I love you too much to stand in the way of that." Noah's eyes shone with emotion. Marcus, for the first time, looked truly taken aback. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. Daniel turned to him, his expression unreadable. "You hurt him, and I'll end you." Marcus smirked slightly. "Fair enough." Noah laughed, a real laugh, full of relief. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something settle inside him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was a start. 1 year later. Time had a way of healing things. It wasn't always smooth. There were still difficult conversations, still moments of tension, still emotions that needed sorting. But there was also progress. Marcus wasn't just a ghost from the past anymore. He had a job now, a stable life. He and Noah had built something real. Something that didn't threaten what Daniel and Noah had, but rather added to it. And Daniel? He was still Noah's dad. That had never changed. One evening, as Daniel grilled burgers in the backyard, he looked up to see Marcus tossing a football with Noah. They were laughing. Daniel smiled. Noah turned, catching his eye. "You wanna join?" Daniel smirked, setting down the spatula. "You sure you can handle me?" Noah grinned. "Bring it on, old man." And as Daniel jogged onto the grass, tackling his son in a fit of laughter, he realized something. Love wasn't about ownership. It was about showing up. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.